Full screen. All right, welcome everybody to this edition of the NRA Lab stream. Today we have a pretty sweet guest lined up, Ryan Adzima. Why don't you take a second to introduce yourself?
My name is Ryan Adzima. I am a mobility wireless architect. I specialize in all things wireless and the ancillary systems around the wireless networking.
Sweet, and you've been at this for a while. Like as long as I've known you, this has been like your thing. You know wireless way better than pretty much anybody that I know. I only know a few wireless folks because I'm less on that side of things. But like it's there. Whenever I have wireless questions, it's always like you, Jake Snyder. I went to a few events with him, a few folks like that. So you've been involved with this for like I don't know how long you've been in the industry. As long as it's existed.
Yeah, specifically focused on wireless has been about 10 years. In that neighborhood. So yeah,
Neat.
I am Jake and some of the other guys you probably know are the ones I look up to. So yeah, I do my best, but I'm by no means the best.
Nice. Well, so what I mean, this is a question born primarily out of ignorance because one of the things that I like to do is every once in a while figure out like what's the current every discipline is going through some sort of like upending, some sort of transformation that everybody likes to talk about, whether it's like marketing fluff or not. What's the current talk of the town in the wireless industry? What's the current thing that people are looking at as like, oh, that's the next evolution? Are we still doing the whole like, oh, we're going from N to AC to whatever is that still what people are obsessed with, or are we moving on to something else?
No, it's definitely with the upcoming ratification soon of AX. That is pretty much what everyone's focused on. Introducing high efficiency, helping make high density designs a lot easier, better performing. Unfortunately, the programmability and the things that you would be interested in are still very much in the background. For some reason, this industry is just really hard to shift into that mindset of programming, automation, things like that. Even though I've been saying it for years, since the explosion of SDN and programmability, wireless networking, the engineers that do it should have adapted very easily. SDN is a controller-based system
Sure.
that centralizes and separates the control and data planes, and that's what wireless has been doing for 20 years. It shouldn't be a hard concept for us. Programmability, we have radio automation, all of that stuff. It's been a hard thing to crack, to get engineers on board, even though if you break it down, that's what they're already doing. So
yeah.
Myself and quite a few others have been trying to bring that to the forefront, but then with AX coming and possibly new spectrum coming, it just kind of gets pushed to the background.
Sure, yeah, and one of the things that I like to talk about when we do talk about automation is break things down in terms of like, okay, what are your common workflows? What are the things you spend most of your time doing? I was at Interop recently, and I raised this question because a lot of times when we talk about automation in the network engineering community broadly, network automation, we like to talk about configuration management. I think primarily because it's kind of easy to wrap your head around as a thing you can automate, but it in my experience it doesn't represent even a large fraction of the time that an engineer will actually use their time to do in a given week. Primarily ITIL, I think, is to blame for that, where we like shove all of our changes into the weekend, but also there's just a lot more on our plate than just making changes. I'm curious to get your perspective on that. Like, if you could like, verbally build the pie chart of like what kind of things that a typical wireless engineer spends their time doing, or maybe not even from a time perspective, maybe just from a thing that keeps them up at night. Like, what are the things that are the most pressing workflows that maybe could be conducive to automation?
So configuration obviously is there when you're deploying a network. That's going to be right there at the front, making sure that everything has the same configuration. I think for wireless engineers, the biggest thing that keeps us up at night is network health. It's not, we're not dealing with switches where we know a cable is going to carry the signal properly. We have a shared environment that's transient in many cases, especially large venues where the health of the network is paramount, and monitoring that, reacting to it, making sure that everything is where you need it to be, and then finding optimizations. That's the day to day of an engineer. A lot of troubleshooting, a lot of packet analysis, protocol level stuff, and then the medium level stuff. So we go even further. You don't see a data center engineer out there uh, tapping into the wire and seeing that the electrons are flowing properly.
Sure.
So that adds a whole separate level to us as wireless engineers. That makes it a little bit more difficult when you have shared frequencies with all these other protocols and some proprietary,
And
some open.
microwaves.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult. So those are the things that a lot of people spend most of their time
Sure.
on. So a majority of the time, it's the client devices that are our issues. So trying to figure out, based on what we see from the network, what the client is doing wrong, and correlating that information is the biggest the hurdles that we face, and that's personally where I would say I spend about 40 to 50% of my day just going through that kind of stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, how in your mind, like, where do you think automation could help with that? Is it sort of like a data retrieval kind of thing, where like if you could like automate the collection of, context, like one of the biggest time sucks during a troubleshooting exercise, especially because often, at least on the like core networking side of things, you're usually talking about some sort of an outage. Maybe on the wireless
Mm.
side, there are shades of gray there where you could have like some just bad performance or an outage. There's some leeway there, I think, but generally speaking, like one of the things that I've had success with people is automating data retrieval and basically putting it all in one place so that you can see sort of what the current state of things is before you have to like go in and get your arms dirty basically. Does that track with the wireless side of things, or maybe
Oh,
is there something that
absolutely.
I'm missing there?
No, that's absolutely part of it. So the telemetry, the health of the network is um, keeping that information, because a lot of times a user will come to me and say, "Yesterday I was having an issue
Yeah.
at around 4 o'clock." There's no way to go back and look at any of that
Yeah.
without taking that telemetry. A lot of manufacturers will have their own proprietary systems, but they won't allow you to get as deep into it without a lot of custom configuration. And if I'm doing a lot of custom configuration, why not build my own TIG stack or something like that to ingest that data? The other part of it is looking for anomalies. The human eye can only see so much.
Sure.
We can't correlate a lot of information accurately. So seeing those outliers and kind of calling them out, um, you end up with a lot of false positives until you tune your system to your network. But getting it that way really helps, because you can almost act proactively on a lot of these issues, because you see kind of the cascading effect. 802.11 is a protocol designed to work until it can't work anymore.
Sure.
So it will degrade and degrade and degrade until it just shuts off.
Yeah.
So if we can catch it before it starts that cascading degradation of performance and react to it, that's a big part of maintaining a healthy network.
Yeah. You mentioned something there that I want to capitalize on because it comes up often. Derek and I, we talk about automation like as a broad topic, but a lot of times when we talk about these things, we're not necessarily even talking about like automation per se. A lot of times we unintentionally conflate that with just becoming much more, I guess, adept at owning the solution, right? So like as engineers that work for IT departments, like our job is not to reinvent the wheel, but sometimes we are the only person in the world that can glue certain components together to create to create the solution. And you mentioned spinning up your own tick stack. I know what that is. Can you explain what that is to the listeners and why a skill set that involves knowing how that works and how to set it up and how to maintain it might be useful in a networking context? Because I happen to agree with you.
So I am by no means an expert in this area. I am relatively new to it. Only within the past year have I started spinning up my own. But using Telegraph, InfluxDB, Grafana, or any other backend systems that are out there. I know Prometheus is out there. I have not touched that yet.
Yeah.
But for a basic view of my network, I'm able to use Telegraph to throw it all in, and I can grab the vendor-specific SNMP MIBs. I can use APIs. I can gather that information however I want. The time series data that I'm then sticking into Influx and using Grafana to present it to myself.
And this is very interesting though, because Telegraph, like there's a few things here that I just know network engineers as a whole are not paying enough attention to this, because it is quite awesome how well aligned I think that space is with what the needs are of most network engineers today. Take Telegraph for instance. I mean, it's been a little bit since I've looked at it, but if my memory serves, Telegraph actually has specific. You mentioned SNMP specifically, like it has actually network specific telemetry options to ingest things like that, just ready to go. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel there. It's there for you to use.
Yeah, and unfortunately in the wireless space we have a lot of custom proprietary MIBs. So plugging those in to Telegraph is quite easy. I wouldn't say it's a day one kind of thing, but reading a bit of document, looking around GitHub at other people's configurations, you can generally find what you need to customize Telegraph enough to gather everything you need and throw it into a database.
Yeah, and Damion Garros, who I don't think we've had on the stream yet, but we need to very soon. I also talked with him at Interop about this, and he actually gave a talk. It was a really good talk. I think unfortunately Interop talks aren't recorded. I think the Network to Code folks might have recorded it, and they may publish it soon. Not sure about that yet, but I know the slides are public. Anyway, he gave a talk on basically how and why to use TSDBs as a network engineer, and it was stellar. And I'm a little biased because I like to latch onto topics in the automation space, or at least automation adjacent, that don't have to do with configuration management, because I think it's an underserved conversation.
Yeah.
So it was stellar, and I think you're on the right track there, because there's just so much to explore there that's not explored enough right now.
Yeah, and like you said, time series it's just so incredibly important for wireless specifically, because correlating everything that's happening at one time, whether it's channel utilization, retries on the transmit or receive, spectrum health, putting that all into one interface, you need to log that information in a time series fashion. So
do you have to deal with like I imagine that within a specific like domain, say like a campus or set of campuses, it's pretty easy to have all of that be basically under one sort of administrative domain from like a controller perspective, or maybe one of the cloud hosted options. Do you have is there a big like multi-vendor, is there a big push for wireless multi-vendor deployments? Like, is that a thing that you have to deal with a lot of times?
No. So wireless is one of the least interoperable systems you will ever find.
I had a feeling.
Yes, we're based on the 802.11 standard, but every vendor mixes in their own.
Sure.
You cannot traditionally have multiple wireless networks working together. You're not even. I like to take the approach of best tool for the job. So for my point-to-point links between buildings, I may choose one vendor. For wireless access for clients, I'm going to choose another. Those systems are never going to talk to each other.
Yeah, it's like traditional network switches. They all run Ethernet, but that doesn't mean they all run the same network operating system.
Right. Yeah.
RF is RF, but that doesn't mean they have to all use the same control plane. And they don't.
But
it sounds like
there are even standards in 802.11, portions of 802.11 that are designed for interoperability, for meshing. And now we're starting to see management side kind of vendor agnostic through OpenConfig. The wireless networking industry is finally starting to adopt OpenConfig. There's a few leaders. Most of them are cloud-based, because it's just easier for the back end to be built that way. But there are a few campus solutions that do have OpenConfig built in, and the thing I love about that is I was talking to someone who runs a very large network that has OpenConfig, and I've been trying to push it in my organization.
Yeah.
His tier 1, tier 2 teams doing basic troubleshooting and customer support, they don't care what the end access point is. They don't care what operating system it's running. They have the data that's being pulled, the telemetry out of it, and the logs that they're able to review off of that. So the architecture team can then choose the best tool for the job.
Nice.
And the best system for the job. So we're, again, starting to see this kind of to move forward.
Now, I imagine a lot of those models had to be written from scratch because, I mean, you know, where it comes from, like administering like the campus switches and how they're configured to support the wireless infrastructure. I imagine a lot of those models already existed, at least in part, but the wireless specific side, does this extend to the actual controllers themselves and configuring the wireless networks themselves? Because I imagine a lot of that had to be written from scratch, right?
Yeah. So a lot of the OpenConfig organization group has created a lot of the models for something that every wireless network has. Nice. You have radio 0, you have radio 1. What channel is it on? What's its channel width? What's its transmit power? All of that stuff. So they built these models, and now they're allowing areas for proprietary. Everyone has their own radio management system. It's proprietary. So how do you control that and set its thresholds? So they're opening up different areas, and that'll be the vendor's choice of where to stick it. But if you can build 90% of your config using the open standards and then just fill in the gaps using those custom areas, it helps a lot. So we are seeing that, and we are talking directly to controllers in some cases. In some cases, it's being proxied through the cloud management platform, and then sending the config down to the client or the access points as clients to the system.
I want to pour one out for all the vendors that can no longer provide value by inserting an underscore in their interface names instead of just leaving it as a standard name. It's like I'm an innovative, I'm a visionary, and so I'm going to call radio 1 radio _1.
Yeah.
Because that's what I do.
Yeah.
No, it's good. It's good to see we're moving away from that. Yeah.
But the biggest hurdle, I think, is a lot of these vendors, they sell their own wireless NMS. And so wanting to move away from that, as opposed to adopting that as the way that their NMS works, has been, I think, the biggest hurdle. It's more of a business than a technical business.
Sure. Nice.
But there's a lot of progress being made.
Yeah, that's good to see. I didn't know about that. OpenConfig's been around for a little bit. It's not surprising to me that it's finding adjacent areas to get into, because it does. It's not really meant to solve all the problems, but at least it keeps the simple stuff from being brought up for debate time and time again.
Yeah.
One sort of last question. I'm curious, like what in the world of wireless, what are wireless engineers doing to get up to speed on automation, and how can we better help meet them where they are, I suppose?
So again, this goes back to the biggest problem being proprietary systems.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to build automation from scratch for proprietary systems when you're talking about wireless is a relatively small field. Sure. Compared to data center, campus LAN, WAN, all of that. Wireless is a very small field. So getting enough people contributing or building their own tools to manage these proprietary systems, which hopefully would eventually lead the vendors to opening everything up a little bit more. And we are seeing a lot of APIs these days, but not very great implementations.
Sure.
That's our biggest hurdle right now, getting people comfortable with it. And a lot of the times what I hear is, I want to learn, but I have no idea where to start. And that is a big problem because every vendor makes it slightly different. I can't take a tool that I've built for my network and just publish it and make it available and have it work for a dozen other people that want to use it. There's a lot of customization that needs to go in to any solution for wireless.
And in the wired world, I mean, for a while the struggle was just getting vendors to publish APIs. I mean, it was screen scraping was the name of the game for, and still is in some networks. But even 5 years ago, it was pretty much all we had. I remember one of the first REST APIs I ever saw was on the Cisco Nexus 9000 line when ACI came out. They had one. I think EOS eAPI happened probably a few years before that. I didn't know about it. I hadn't touched Arista at that point. And then of course NetConf had existed well before that. I guess the first question I have on that is, are we in the wireless world? Are we still? I know of some. I don't want to name any names, but I know of some companies that just simply don't have an API. Like I asked this question in I think a Network Field Day presentation probably 4 years ago, and their answer was nope, we don't have one, and like that was it. Like, are we still dealing with that, or
absolutely.
That? Oh, really? Okay.
No. We are still well in that territory.
Yeah, see, that's tough, especially if it's a cloud managed wireless offering, because not only do you not have an API, but you also don't have access to any sort of kit where you can even do screen scraping. Like that's not even an option. You have to go through their point and click GUI. So that's kind of tough.
Specifically with the cloud, what we see is we have a lot that have no API. We have some that have very, very limited APIs that are mostly configuration and deployment. So they're designed for your VARs and your MSPs for large scale deployment.
Right.
And then we have the API first companies, which are very few and far between, where they have their cloud dashboard, but they're developing the API, and you'll have features in the API before you have them in the dashboard because that's not what they're necessarily worried about.
Sure.
And then on the campus side, the enterprise stuff that sits on prem, we have a wide range of ways to configure. Some of them are proprietary protocols and systems, especially on the telemetry side.
Yeah.
And then a REST API, they come out with some fantastic REST API, and you end up finding out it's just a command wrapper.
Sure.
It structures the data on the reply, which I can do that with NetMiko.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's HTTP as a transport, not exactly. Exactly revolutionary. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So
that makes
sense.
Yeah,
there's a huge range, and unfortunately we're starting to see some of the good stuff, but they're very, very hesitant because again, wireless is this very closed system, and they like to keep it that way.
Yeah. Actually, that leads me into a kind of a slight tangent, but related. How has Linux affected the wireless industry? Are there alternatives to maybe like common enterprise wireless controllers that you can run in open source just on Linux, or any number of things like that, or is it even not to that point?
If you wanted to, you definitely could. A lot of the access points that you see out on the market now, there's the the big 3 or 4 companies out there that build their own hardware, they design their own radios, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But you can go on, any of the Chinese wholesale sites. You can buy access points that run BusyBox or any number of Linux flavors.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in a lot of the SMB kind of small enterprise space. So if you wanted to, the capability's there. I don't know anyone that has gone down that route.
Yeah, the most I'm familiar with is OpenWRT I used to run at my house or in my apartment actually when I was in college. That's about the extent of it. But I wasn't sure if it had made it, if anything like that had made its way up into like the enterprise space.
There actually is a company that kind of touches on that SMB to small enterprise, that they had a fantastic management platform, and they made okay access points. Most of them were off the shelf, like I said, and they kind of stopped selling access points. Now it's bring your own.
Wow.
So that kind of does go into what you said, but it's not an open platform. It is a proprietary proprietary system.
Hmm.
They add a lot of their own code into it.
Sure.
But yeah, they saw that, sometimes you just can't compete on building radios and all that stuff. So you go and you make the management better.
So the RF side of things is more or less commoditized. How does I guess commoditized? I guess in the sense that like once the standards have been established and whatnot, right?
Yeah, I mean, we only have a handful of chipset manufacturers, um, a handful of chipsets at any given time
Sure.
that are coming out to support a different standard. Um, so yeah, if someone makes a decent white label access point, um, and I imagine it's the same in the switching world, and you have the desire to run your own OS and customize it yourself, or even have some other third party that does management on that platform,
Yeah.
and the hardware does what you need it to, it's a perfectly fine solution as long as it meets your
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah, I mean that is a thing I think in the switching world. I don't I think the conversation there is a little backwards because most people in the networking world approach that with a well what why do I need to run Linux on my switch? And I think the big use case that I've found success with, and this is kind of sad, but one of the things that I've noticed when people do um, sort of glom onto that idea, it's because they can't get compute capacity to run their tools, and so they want an open switch where they can install their own software on top of and run their tools there. And I guess whatever works for you, like that's fine.
Yeah.
Do you want my credit card, man? Like here, have some AWS stuff. I don't.
Yeah. No, I've kind of joked, half joked about it, but I think edge computing, especially in the networking world, a lot of the systems rolling up data and correlating information. I would love to see that moved out to the access points. These
Yeah,
Our access points are getting so incredibly powerful, but we're
sure.
still just doing the same old thing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
we have multi-processor, multi-core systems with multiple gigs of RAM out there now, and they're serving clients at layer 2.
yeah. Well, not to
There's
mention
a lot
the
more going
data.
on.
I've been amazed at the types of things that you can infer from modern wireless solutions without having any. It used to be like if you wanted to get information, say, on the people that were entering your store, for instance, you'd have to have them install some sort of app, and that app would have to get registered somehow with your wireless. These days, you don't even need to do that. Like you can,
No.
like the idea of like being able to like put like virtual beacons in a store, like Bluetooth beacons that don't actually exist. They just are virtual. Like that blows my mind, and that's so cool. And I think you're totally right. I think we're just scratching the surface on like what we can do from that. I think we as engineers, and I don't think this is unnatural. I think we naturally sort of we're attracted to the 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 doing the thing, like the
Mhm.
actual like making a change. I'm an engineer, so I'm going to build this, and it's going to be change to be the thing that I want to be. I think one thing that we really need to do a better job on is learning how to retrieve data and then do interesting things with that data. Um,
Absolutely.
like that's a
The
huge
amount of
area.
information, like you said, the amount of information that you can grab out of the air, and then the things you can do with it
Yeah,
are phenomenal. And that's where a lot of the proprietary solutions come in. You mentioned the virtual Bluetooth. Is that is done, not so much at the software layer. Yes, there's a lot of software powering that,
yeah,
but the way that was, kind of revolutionized that area, is more in the antennas, the physics of the RF layer, being able to direct the information and using different techniques for location services.
sure,
Everyone
sure,
knows triangulation, but wireless networks don't actually use triangulation. We use something called trilateration, and now we're using something called angle of arrival, time difference of arrival. So with all these antenna arrays, there's some crazy stuff going on, and the amount of information it produces allows us to do some really interesting things and sometimes scary things. Um,
sure. Yeah, yeah. a little bit surveillance state, but
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
assume positive intent
yeah,
for
yeah.
now. I mean, this is the thing. Like we always run into the question of like, well, infrastructure, especially network engineers, because we are so low on the totem pole, OSI stack wise, we you know, we're always thought of as infrastructure. We're always a cost center. Like that's the perpetuating like idea. But like this is the area. If you just tap in a little bit into what's available in the infrastructure and figure out a way to represent that data that's meaningful to your stakeholders, that's I think that's where we start getting out of the idea of being just a cost center and actually starting to provide value. Because
Yeah.
no one else has the data that we have, so we can either choose to figure out how to present it or not, and that's fine if we don't, because we still are needed. We're still infrastructure, but um,
Mhm.
I think the point that you and I are both trying to make is that we could be so much more if we just access that a little bit.
I have worked on many projects in my previous life as a VAR where um, the the IT department wasn't involved in the decision making process. It was the marketing team or
Yeah,
the legal team
yeah,
bringing in and saying, "What can this technology do for us?" and then it being pushed down on the IT department.
yeah,
Um, so, so yeah, there is a lot that can be done, and I think it all starts with basic telemetry.
yeah,
Um, that's where wireless engineers need to get to, and not everyone needs to get there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would love to say that everyone needs to learn programming, uh, but we still need guys out there that understand the RF,
Totally.
how to.
Yeah,
Just like in a data center, you still need guys that know how to run cables and run them well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're the same way.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and actually, I'll plug a Packet Pushers podcast that came out just last week, where Jeremy Schulman and oh, I can't remember. There was another gentleman on there. I can't remember his name. I apologize if I apologize for that. I had the name on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it. They talked about anyway. They talked about do you need to be a programmer? And the overwhelming consensus, and I agree with this, is no. You need to learn enough based on the use case. Like if you are building tools like either just for yourself or your team, then yeah, you should know enough to be able to do that. But in terms of like building and maintaining software like systems for like organization wide use, like no, you need a software developer to do that, whose job it is, who specializes in building software, because we all have specialties,
yep.
right? And I think anybody that suggests that you need to maintain two specialties it has probably neither of those specialties. Um, I think the point here is like, look, there are people that exist whose job it is like for instance, just take one of these wireless companies. There are these companies who hire teams of PhDs to build the software and the hardware to make all of this possible. You're never going to reinvent that wheel, and nor should you even try. So let that exist.
Mhm.
Where I think where we can spend our time and energy more wisely is figuring out how to stitch those things together. Sort of like intra-domain automation, meaning I automate the way that this particular system works. Like that's not really what we need to be doing. Let the entity that specializes in that, or the person that specializes in that, it might be just a single tool, do that. And then we can, as network engineers, we focus a lot more on the inter-domain. We stitch things together. We do things like
Yep.
event triggering. So like when this event happens, I know that this other action needs to take place. Maybe if a ticket opens, then I need to go trigger this troubleshooting workflow. Whatever it is. Those are the kind of things that really only IT practitioners who are in the weeds can do, because we all have our own specific like organizational processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I even though yes, I develop a lot of my own tools and things. I think of myself more as an integrator.
Yeah,
I'm taking a ton of disparate systems, gathering all the information from them, and finding a way to present it in a usable way for me.
nice.
So
So one closing question, yeah, like what can we do better? I think in terms of helping the wireless industry get started with automation. What kind of topics do you think would be most useful as a starting point that we can capitalize on and help folks get started with?
I think a lot of wireless engineers are struggling with operational information, CSV, Excel documents,
Yeah,
manipulating files, gathering information from different systems, just how to take that information, store it, and present it in a usable way. Um, and a lot of that translates from the network side to the wireless just fine.
sure.
It's just how do we You mentioned Telegraph has a lot built in for network engineers. How do we extend that and teach the wireless engineers to build upon that system to get the information they need?
Sure.
I think that's where a lot of it lies. Like I said, everyone starts with, I don't know what to do first. I don't know where to get started.
Yeah.
And presenting, even if it's just a basic networking task, presenting it in the context of a wireless network is a pretty meaningful way to get someone started.
Yeah. You mean you don't have to boil the ocean? Like you don't have to do everything all at once, simultaneously?
No,
Wow,
no, oh god,
that's crazy.
so many of our applications just don't have SDKs or APIs. They output CSVs, they output JSON. We can
Sure.
extract information from them.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier, 50% of my day is troubleshooting. The other 50% is taking data from all of these different systems, um, outputting it to Word, copy and pasting out of it. Automating those flows, because wireless systems aren't made for developers. It's made for guys who just want a document spit out.
Sure.
So showing them how they can integrate that information into, like I said, usable, displayable, reportable uh, uh, kind of screens
Yeah. Yeah.
really would go like.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure
thank
as
you for
always.
having me.
As always, you and I have known each other for a number of years, so it's always just good to talk
Yeah,
in general. But
yeah,
especially thanks for joining and giving us a perspective into the wireless industry. I don't think we get enough of it, so I appreciate the insight.
I agree.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, of course. Thanks, Ryan. And for those
All
on
right.
the stream, I want to mention one announcement. We are actually more than likely, we're definitely going to move to a model where we stream every other week. We've been streaming weekly thus far, and right now the schedules are okay, but in the past it's been kind of difficult to do it every week. So we're going to move to a semi-weekly cadence, so every other week. We'll be announcing all of this on Twitter, so in case you missed this, that's fine. But we'll be doing every other week, and we'll update the stream page on our site with the appropriate schedule. Thanks again to Ryan, and thanks to you for watching, and hope to see you next time.